Highly spiritual chosen women do not wake up one day and suddenly change their entire lives. Their transformation is subtle, sacred, and deeply intentional. It happens quietly, often unseen by the world, but powerfully felt within their soul. As they awaken spiritually, they begin to shed layers of habits, beliefs, and attachments that no longer align with who they are becoming. This process is not rushed, because divine growth is never forced. It unfolds in perfect timing. If you are a chosen woman, you may notice that certain things you once tolerated now feel heavy, draining, or even painful to engage in. This is not weakness, it is spiritual refinement. God begins to fine-tune your discernment, your energy, and your boundaries. What you are about to hear may feel deeply familiar. Let these truths awaken what has already been stirring inside you. 1. They slowly quit explaining themselves. Highly spiritual chosen women stop over-explaining their decisions, feelings, and boundaries. But this shift does not happen overnight. In the beginning, they still feel the need to justify themselves because they were once conditioned to believe that clarity earns acceptance. They explain why they said no, why they pulled back, why they changed, and why something no longer feels right. They offer context, history, and emotional labor in hopes of being understood. But over time, experience becomes their teacher. They begin to notice that no amount of explaining satisfies those who are committed to misunderstanding them. Some people do not want clarity, they want control, and no explanation is ever enough for someone who benefits from your confusion. As these women grow spiritually, they realize that constantly explaining themselves drains their energy and weakens their boundaries. They see how often their explanations are not received with respect, but with resistance, dismissal, or manipulation. Slowly, they learn that alignment speaks louder than words. When something is right, it requires little defense. When something is wrong, no explanation will fix it. This understanding changes how they move through the world. Silence becomes their shield, not as a form of punishment, but as a form of self-respect. They also recognize that over-explaining is often rooted in fear. Fear of being rejected, misunderstood, or abandoned. Healing teaches them that they can survive misunderstanding. They can survive being disliked. They can survive someone not agreeing with them. Peace becomes more important than being validated. They stop giving long speeches to people who have already made up their minds. They stop pleading for others to see their heart. They trust that those who are meant to walk with them will feel their truth without needing a detailed explanation. In this stage, their communication becomes clean, calm, and intentional. They speak when necessary and remain silent when words would only invite chaos. They understand that their life is not a courtroom and they are not on trial. They no longer explain themselves to be accepted. They explain only when it serves clarity and connection. This is when their energy shifts. This is when their presence becomes grounded, self-assured, and powerful. They learn that true clarity does not come from talking more. It comes from being in alignment with who they are and what they are called to protect. 2. They quit seeking validation from people. Chosen women gradually release the need for approval, but this release comes after many seasons of disappointment. At first, they still look outward for reassurance. They notice how praise lifts them and how criticism wounds them. They feel the emotional highs and lows that come from being seen or ignored. Compliments feel like confirmation. Silence feels like rejection. In the early stages, their confidence rises and falls based on how others respond to them. But life begins to teach them a deeper lesson. People are inconsistent mirrors. They observe how the same people who applaud them one day can question them the next. They notice how validation is often tied to usefulness, compliance, or convenience. When they stop performing, pleasing, or shrinking, the praise disappears. This realization stings, but it awakens them. They begin to understand that validation given by people is conditional, unstable, and unreliable. Slowly, they stop handing others the power to define their worth. As they grow spiritually, they learn to anchor their identity in divine truth rather than human opinion. They stop measuring themselves by applause, likes, recognition, or approval. They realize that being misunderstood does not mean being wrong. Being criticized does not mean being flawed. Being overlooked does not mean being insignificant. This inner shift creates emotional stability. Compliments no longer inflate their ego, and criticism no longer dismantles their spirit. They also recognize that seeking validation often leads to self-betrayal. It tempts them to silence their intuition, ignore red flags, and abandon their boundaries. When they stop needing approval, they start making decisions that honor their soul, even when those decisions are unpopular. They no longer explain themselves to gain acceptance. They no longer change their truth to fit into rooms that were never meant for them. Over time, they develop a quiet confidence that does not need to be announced. Their self-worth becomes internal, steady, and unshakable. They know who they are when no one is watching. They trust their inner knowing more than external noise. This is when their presence becomes calm and grounded. They stop asking, "Do you see me?" and start living from the truth, "I know who I am." That knowing frees them. That knowing protects them. That knowing is unbreakable. 3. They quit forcing connections. One of the most painful yet powerful shifts for highly spiritual chosen women is learning to let relationships fade naturally. This is not something they do easily. For a long time, they are the ones who initiate conversations, fix misunderstandings, extend grace, and hold relationships together. They believe love means effort, patience, and endurance, even at the cost of their own comfort. So when connections begin to feel one-sided, confusing, or draining, they try harder instead of stepping back. At first, they interpret distance as failure. They wonder what they did wrong. They question whether they should have been more understanding, more forgiving, or more accommodating. But eventually, awareness sets in. They notice how forcing connections requires them to shrink, silence themselves, or tolerate emotional imbalance. They realize that true alignment does not require constant effort, chasing, or self-abandonment. As they mature spiritually, they stop resisting endings that feel heavy. They understand that not every connection is meant to last forever. Some people are assigned to seasons, not lifetimes. They learn that when a relationship requires them to beg for consistency, respect, or presence, it is already out of alignment. Instead of clinging, they loosen their grip. Instead of forcing, they allow. This shift feels like loss at first. Distance can feel like abandonment. Silence can feel uncomfortable. But with time, clarity replaces confusion. They see how many connections were sustained only by their effort. When they stop forcing, what falls away reveals the truth. What remains reveals alignment. This process teaches them discernment. Eventually, they trust divine separation. They recognize that distance is sometimes protection, not punishment. God removes people who cannot go where they are being led. By allowing relationships to fade naturally, they make room for connections that meet them in authenticity, reciprocity, and respect. They stop chasing love and start allowing it. What once felt lonely becomes peaceful. What once felt like loss becomes freedom. 4. They quit arguing with the unaware. Chosen women reach a point where they stop trying to awaken people who are committed to misunderstanding them. In earlier stages of their journey, they explain, defend, and debate their truth. They believe that if they just find the right words, others will finally see them. They engage in arguments hoping to be validated, respected, or understood. But these exchanges often leave them drained, frustrated, and emotionally depleted. Over time, they begin to recognize a pattern. No matter how clearly they speak, Some people refuse to hear. No matter how calmly they explain, some people choose distortion. This is when wisdom replaces reaction. They realize that awareness cannot be forced. Spiritual eyes must open willingly. Arguing with the unaware does not bring clarity. It only wastes sacred energy. As they evolve, they choose observation over reaction. They listen more and speak less. They recognize that silence can be more powerful than explanation. They no longer feel responsible for convincing others of their truth. They understand that people hear based on their level of consciousness, not on the quality of the message. Detachment becomes an act of self-respect. They stop engaging in conversations that spiral into disrespect, gaslighting, or circular arguments. They protect their peace by refusing to wrestle with minds that are closed. This does not mean they become cold or arrogant. It means they become discerning. They learn that their purpose requires energy, focus, and clarity. Arguing drains all three. Instead of trying to be understood by everyone, they choose to be aligned with themselves. This is when their power deepens. Their presence speaks louder than debates ever could. Their life becomes the message. Their calm becomes the answer. Their silence becomes wisdom. 5. They quit overgiving without reciprocity. Slowly, chosen women come to the realization that constantly pouring into others without receiving anything in return is not love. It is self-neglect. In earlier seasons, they gave freely and endlessly. They were the emotional support, the listener, the healer, the one who showed up even when they were exhausted. They believed that giving more would eventually be appreciated, returned, or at least respected. They told themselves that being patient and selfless was a virtue, even when it left them empty. But time reveals truth. They begin to notice how some people only appear when they need something. They see how their kindness is expected but rarely reciprocated. Their generosity becomes assumed, not honored. At first, they feel guilty for noticing this imbalance. They question whether setting limits makes them selfish or unloving. But spiritual growth sharpens their discernment. They learn that divine love does not demand self-abandonment. As their awareness deepens, they begin to give intentionally instead of compulsively. They stop overextending themselves to prove their worth. They understand that reciprocity does not mean equal effort in every moment, but it does mean mutual care, respect, and consideration. They no longer justify one-sided dynamics. They no longer confuse endurance with loyalty. This shift changes how they relate to others. They still love deeply, but now their love is rooted in wisdom. They protect their energy the way one protects something sacred. They recognize that pouring into empty vessels drains the soul. By choosing balance, they preserve their emotional and spiritual strength. Over time, relationships either rise to meet this standard or quietly fall away. What remains is healthier, lighter, and aligned with truth. 6. They quit living in survival mode. Highly spiritual women begin to release the belief that life must always feel hard. For many years, they lived in constant survival mode, always bracing for the next challenge, the next disappointment, the next crisis. Stress felt normal. Exhaustion felt familiar. They wore their endurance like a badge of honor, believing that rest had to be earned through suffering. Peace felt suspicious, as if calm meant something bad was coming. But awakening changes this mindset. Slowly they realize that constant struggle is not a requirement for growth. They begin to question why their nervous system is always on edge. They notice how burnout steals their joy, creativity, and clarity. They start listening to their body, their spirit, and their intuition. Rest no longer feels lazy. It feels necessary. As they heal, they stop glorifying hustle and chaos. They learn that divine guidance does not speak through panic or pressure. It speaks through stillness and clarity. They give themselves permission to slow down. They stop reacting to everything. They choose peace intentionally, even when the world encourages urgency. This shift is uncomfortable at first. Letting go of survival mode feels unfamiliar, but over time their nervous system calms. Their decisions become wiser. Their energy becomes cleaner. They realize that life flows more easily when they are not constantly bracing for impact. They understand that God does not require them to suffer endlessly to be worthy. Peace becomes their new baseline, and from that peace, everything else begins to align. They quit tolerating disrespect, disguised as love. Chosen women eventually awaken to the subtle ways disrespect hides behind affection. In earlier stages, they tolerated inconsistency, emotional distance, and neglect because it was packaged as love. They excused hurtful behavior. They justified being ignored, dismissed, or taken for granted. They told themselves that love required sacrifice, patience, and understanding, even when it came at the cost of their self-worth. Awareness changes everything. Slowly, they begin to feel the difference between love that nourishes and attachment that drains. They notice how their spirit tightens around certain people. They recognize patterns of emotional unavailability, broken promises, and lack of accountability. At first, they try to explain it away, but eventually truth becomes undeniable. They learn that love does not confuse, belittle, or diminish the soul. Love does not require constant self-defense. Love does not leave them feeling unseen or unsafe. With this clarity, their tolerance for subtle disrespect disappears. They stop negotiating their worth. They stop accepting crumbs where they deserve presents. Walking away is not easy, but it becomes necessary. They choose self-respect over familiarity. They choose peace over emotional chaos. And in doing so, love transforms. It no longer hurts the way it used to, because they no longer stay where their soul is dishonored. This decision restores their power, their confidence, and their emotional clarity. 8. They quit rushing divine timing. Highly spiritual women stop forcing outcomes when they learn to trust divine orchestration. In earlier seasons, they rushed timelines out of fear. Fear of being left behind, forgotten, or unfulfilled. They pushed doors open before they were ready. They tried to control when things should happen, believing that waiting meant failure or delay meant denial. Over time, experience teaches them patience. They begin to notice how things that arrived too early often came with complications, stress, or loss. They see how forced outcomes required constant effort to maintain. Slowly, they release the need to control timing. They learn to sit with uncertainty without panic. Delays begin to feel different. Instead of punishment, they feel like preparation. Instead of rejection, they feel like redirection. They trust that what is meant for them will arrive when they are strong enough, wise enough, and aligned enough to sustain it. Anxiety loosens its grip. Faith deepens. This trust changes how they move through life. They stop chasing. They stop rushing decisions. They allow things to unfold naturally. They understand that divine timing protects them from what they are not ready to handle. And when things finally arrive, they arrive with stability, peace, and longevity. What is meant for them no longer requires force. 9. They quit shrinking their light. The final and most powerful thing chosen women quit is hiding who they truly are. For a long time, they dimmed their light to make others comfortable. They softened their wisdom, silenced their intuition, and minimized their presence to avoid being judged, misunderstood, or rejected. They learned early that standing out attracted resistance, so they made themselves smaller. But spiritual maturity brings courage. Slowly, they reclaim every part of themselves they once suppressed. They stop apologizing for their depth, their insight, and their spiritual authority. They accept that their presence will not be for everyone, and that is exactly how it is meant to be. They understand that light naturally exposes what is hidden. Some will feel comforted by it. Others will feel challenged by it. This no longer frightens them. They embrace their role fully, without guilt or hesitation. Their energy becomes calm, grounded, and undeniable. They no longer seek permission to exist as they are. They show up whole. They speak with clarity. They move with confidence. Their light becomes a guide for those who are ready and a mirror for those who are not. In choosing to stop shrinking, they step fully into who they were always meant to be. If this message found you at the exact moment you needed it, it is not a coincidence. It is confirmation. You are shedding, rising, and remembering who you truly are. This is the Woman of Light channel. If this resonated with your spirit, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next awakening message meant for you. And for those who receive this word right on time, type 1111 in the comment section to activate divine alignment and blessings. Your journey is protected, chosen one. Thank you for watching.